The morning sun cast long shadows across the military base as Sergeant Maria Santos finished her equipment check. Her hands moved with practiced precision, testing each piece of gear that might mean the difference between life and death in the field. The radio crackled to life on her shoulder, announcing the morning briefing in 10 minutes. Maria took a deep breath of the crisp air and headed toward the command tent, her boots crunching on the gravel path. At 28 years old, Maria had already served 3 tours of duty in Afghanistan. Her fellow soldiers respected her not just for her medical training, but for her calm under pressure and her unwavering commitment to bringing everyone home alive. She had joined the Army as a combat medic after losing her younger brother in a car accident back home in Texas. The pain of not being able to save him had driven her to learn everything she could about emergency medicine and battlefield trauma care. The briefing tent buzzed with quiet conversation as soldiers filed in. Maria found her usual spot near the back, close enough to hear every detail, but positioned where she could quickly exit if called for an emergency. Lieutenant Colonel James Mitchell entered the tent, and the room fell silent. Mitchell was a decorated officer with 25 years of service, known for his strategic mind and genuine care for his troops. His weathered face showed the weight of command, but his eyes still held the sharp intelligence that had earned him respect throughout the military. "Listen up, everyone," Mitchell began, his voice carrying clearly through the tent. "Intelligence reports indicate increased enemy activity in Sector 7. We have confirmed movement of hostile forces near the village of Kandahar Ridge. Our mission is to establish a forward operating post and provide security for the local population while gathering intelligence on enemy positions." Maria listened carefully as Mitchell outlined the operation. The plan seemed straightforward enough, but she had learned never to underestimate how quickly things could change in combat. Her medical bag was already packed with everything she might need: bandages, morphine, blood-clotting agents, and the various tools that could save lives when seconds mattered. She had also packed extra supplies, knowing that in extended operations, medical resources could become scarce. The briefing continued with details about weather conditions, terrain features, and communication protocols. Maria made mental notes about the locations of potential landing zones for medical evacuation helicopters and identified the quickest routes between various positions their unit would occupy. She had learned to think several steps ahead, always planning for the worst-case scenario while hoping for the best outcome. After the briefing, Maria gathered with her squad to review their specific responsibilities. Corporal Danny Rodriguez, the team's radio operator, had been with Maria on 2 previous deployments. They had developed an almost telepathic communication style that proved invaluable during high-stress situations. Private First Class Ahmed Hassan was newer to the unit, but had already proven himself to be reliable and quick thinking under pressure. "Remember, we stay together and watch each other's backs," Maria told her team. "If anyone gets separated, use the rally points we discussed. Danny, keep that radio working no matter what. Hassan, you stick close to me if we encounter wounded. Your job is to help me save lives and protect the perimeter while I work." The helicopter lifted off from the base at 1400 hours, carrying Maria's unit and several others toward their objective. Through the aircraft's small windows, she watched the landscape below change from the relatively secure area around their base to the more contested regions where enemy forces operated. The pilot's voice came through her headset, providing updates on their progress and potential threats in the area. As they approached the landing zone, Maria felt the familiar mixture of anxiety and determination that came before every mission. She had learned to channel these feelings into heightened awareness and focus. Her training had taught her that fear could be a useful tool if properly controlled, sharpening her senses and reaction times without overwhelming her judgment. The helicopter touched down in a cloud of dust, and Maria's team quickly disembarked. They moved immediately to their assigned positions, establishing a secure perimeter around the landing zone. The terrain was rocky and uneven, with numerous places where enemy forces could potentially hide. Maria noted several locations that would provide good cover if they needed to treat wounded soldiers while under fire. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell coordinated with the other team leaders via radio, ensuring that each unit understood their roles in the larger operation. The plan called for his command team to advance to a hilltop observation post where they could better coordinate the overall mission. From there, Mitchell would have clear sight lines to direct his various units and call for support if needed. Maria's team was assigned to provide security for the command post while also serving as the primary medical response unit for the entire operation. This meant they needed to be prepared to move quickly to assist any unit that encountered trouble. Maria checked her medical supplies one final time and confirmed that her team's communication equipment was functioning properly. The afternoon passed quietly as the various units moved into their positions. Maria found herself in a small depression on the hillside, close enough to the command post to respond immediately if Mitchell or his staff needed medical attention, but positioned where she could also provide covering fire if enemy forces approached their location. The view from her position allowed her to see most of the area where her fellow soldiers were operating. As evening approached, the temperature began to drop. Maria distributed extra water and energy bars to her team, knowing that maintaining their strength and hydration was essential for optimal performance. She also reviewed the evacuation procedures one more time with Danny and Hassan, ensuring that they could execute the plan quickly and efficiently if someone was wounded. The radio chattered quietly with routine status reports from the various teams. Everything seemed to be proceeding according to plan. Local villagers had been cooperative, providing information about recent enemy movements in the area. Intelligence gathered so far suggested that hostile forces were present but had not yet detected the American positions. Mitchell's voice came through the radio, calm and professional as always. All teams, this is 6. Continue current operations. Intelligence indicates possible enemy movement to our north, but nothing confirmed yet. Stay alert and maintain position. Command out. Maria adjusted her position slightly to get a better view of the northern approaches. Through her binoculars, she could see the terrain that would provide the most likely avenue of approach for enemy forces. The area was rocky and broken, offering numerous hiding places for small groups of fighters. She made mental notes about fields of fire and potential fighting positions they might need to use. Hassan whispered quietly, "Sergeant, movement on the ridge line to the northwest." Maria swung her binoculars in that direction and spotted what appeared to be several figures moving among the rocks. The distance made positive identification difficult, but their movement patterns suggested they were trying to avoid detection. "Danny, pass word to 6 that we have possible enemy movement on the northwest ridge line," Maria instructed. "Tell them we're maintaining observation and will report any developments." The radio crackled as Danny relayed the information. Mitchell's response was immediate. "Roger, continue observation. All teams be advised, possible enemy activity to the northwest. Maintain current positions and report any confirmed sightings." Maria continued to watch through her binoculars as more figures appeared on the ridgeline. Their equipment and movement patterns confirmed her suspicions. These were definitely enemy fighters, and they appeared to be conducting reconnaissance of the American positions. She counted at least 8 individuals, though there could be more hidden among the rocks. 6. This is Maria's team. We have confirmed enemy personnel on the northwest ridge. Count 8, possibly more. They appear to be observing our positions. Request guidance on rules of engagement. Mitchell's voice came back immediately. Hold position and maintain observation. Do not engage unless they present an immediate threat. I'm coordinating with other teams to assess the situation. The tension in Maria's position increased as they continued to watch the enemy fighters. Hassan had his rifle ready, while Danny maintained radio contact with the command post. Maria kept her medical bag close at hand, knowing that the situation could escalate quickly. Her years of experience had taught her to read the subtle signs that indicated when combat was imminent. The enemy fighters on the ridge line appeared to be using some type of optical equipment to study the American positions. Maria realized they were conducting the same type of reconnaissance that her own forces had been doing. The big question was whether they intended to attack immediately or withdraw to report their findings to a larger force. "Sergeant," Hassan whispered urgently, "I think I see more movement further north. Looks like they might be trying to flank us." Maria shifted her observation to the area Hassan had indicated. Sure enough, additional figures were visible moving through a ravine that would allow them to approach the command post from an unexpected direction. The enemy force was larger than initially estimated, and they were demonstrating tactical sophistication that suggested experienced fighters rather than untrained militia. "Danny, get 6 on the radio immediately. Tell him we have additional enemy movement attempting to flank from the North Ravine. Estimated enemy strength, now 12 to 15 personnel." As Danny relayed this critical information, Maria began mentally preparing for the possibility of combat. She reviewed the locations where wounded soldiers could be safely treated and identified the best routes for medical evacuation under fire. Her training had taught her that preparation during the calm moments before battle often made the difference between success and failure when chaos erupted. Mitchell's voice crackled through the radio with new urgency. "All teams, we have confirmed enemy forces maneuvering for attack. Prepare defensive positions. Medical team, stand by for possible casualties." This is not a drill. Maria felt her heartbeat increase as adrenaline began flowing through her system. She had been in this situation many times before, but it never became routine. Each combat engagement brought its own unique challenges and dangers. Her job was to keep her team alive while providing medical support to any soldier who needed it, regardless of the risk to herself. The enemy fighters on the ridge line had disappeared from view, but Maria knew they were still there, probably moving to better attack positions. The tactical situation was developing rapidly, and she needed to be ready for whatever came next. Her medical training had taught her that the first few minutes of combat often determined how many lives could be saved. Hassan checked his ammunition and adjusted his position to better cover the northern approach. Danny continued monitoring radio communications while keeping his rifle ready. Maria verified that her medical supplies were easily accessible and began mentally rehearsing the trauma treatment procedures she might need to perform under fire. The hillside grew eerily quiet as both sides prepared for what seemed inevitable. Maria had learned to recognize this particular type of silence, the moment when everyone was holding their breath before violence erupted. Her experience told her that contact was probably only minutes away, and when it came, it would likely be intense and chaotic. Through her binoculars, Maria caught a glimpse of movement near the command post. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell and his staff were adjusting their positions, probably preparing for the enemy attack they all knew was coming. Mitchell's calm leadership had gotten them through difficult situations before, but Maria knew that in combat, even the best plans could fall apart quickly. The radio remained mostly quiet except for brief status updates from the various teams. Everyone was maintaining communication discipline, knowing that excessive radio chatter could provide information to enemy forces who might be monitoring their frequencies. Maria checked her watch and noted that they had been observing enemy movement for almost 30 minutes. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by the sharp crack of rifle fire from the direction of the command post. Maria's heart jumped as she realized the battle had begun. More gunfire erupted from multiple directions as enemy forces launched their attack. The tactical situation she had been mentally preparing for was now reality, and soldiers' lives were hanging in the balance. "Danny, get ready to move," Maria shouted over the sound of gunfire. "Hassan, cover our movement toward the command post. They're going to need medical support, and we need to get there fast." The 3 soldiers began moving toward the sound of battle, knowing that their fellow soldiers were depending on them. Maria's medical training and combat experience would soon be put to the ultimate test as she rushed toward danger to save lives under fire. The gunfire intensified as Maria and her team moved through the rocky terrain toward the command post. Bullets whined overhead, striking rocks and sending fragments flying in all directions. Maria kept low, using every piece of available cover as she advanced toward where her fellow soldiers needed help. Her medical bag bounced against her back with each hurried step, the weight a constant reminder of her life-saving mission. "Contact left," Hassan shouted, raising his rifle toward muzzle flashes visible among the rocks. Enemy fighters had positioned themselves in elevated positions, giving them clear fields of fire down into the American positions. The tactical situation was worse than Maria had initially realized. The enemy had not only achieved surprise, but had also secured advantageous terrain. Danny pressed himself against a large boulder, his radio crackling with urgent communications from multiple teams across the battlefield. "Sergeant, multiple teams reporting casualties. Second squad has 2 wounded, third squad has 1 Kia and 3 wounded. The command post is taking heavy fire." Maria's mind raced as she processed this information. With multiple wounded soldiers scattered across the battlefield, she would need to prioritize her medical response based on the severity of injuries and the tactical situation. Her training had taught her to save the most lives possible, which sometimes meant making difficult decisions about who to treat first. "Hassan, lay down covering fire on that ridge line," Maria commanded. "Danny, tell second squad we're moving to their position first. Then we'll work our way to the command post. Tell them to mark their casualties with smoke if they have it." Hassan opened fire with controlled bursts, his rounds striking the rocks where enemy muzzle flashes had been visible. His accurate shooting forced the enemy fighters to take cover, temporarily reducing the incoming fire that had been pinning down the American forces. This brief respite allowed Maria's team to advance another 50 meters toward the wounded soldiers. The sound of an explosion echoed across the hillside as an enemy grenade detonated near one of the American positions. Maria could hear screaming through the gunfire. Someone had been badly wounded and needed immediate medical attention. She increased her pace, knowing that every second could mean the difference between life and death for her fellow soldiers. "Medic! Medic!" The desperate calls came from multiple directions, creating a cacophony of urgent pleas that would have overwhelmed a less experienced combat medic. Maria had learned to compartmentalize these sounds, focusing on one patient at a time while maintaining awareness of the overall tactical situation. Second squad's position came into view through the smoke and dust. Maria could see 2 soldiers lying motionless while their squad mates returned fire at enemy positions. One of the wounded men was moving slightly, indicating he was still alive, but possibly seriously injured. The other lay completely still, blood pooling beneath his body. "Cover me," Maria shouted to Hassan and Danny before sprinting the final 20 meters to reach the wounded soldiers. Bullets snapped through the air around her as enemy fighters tried to prevent her from reaching her patients. She dove behind cover just as a burst of automatic weapon fire chipped rocks where she had been standing moments before. The first wounded soldier was Private Johnson from Ohio, barely 20 years old with less than 6 months in country. A bullet had struck him in the shoulder, creating a serious but not immediately life-threatening injury. Blood soaked his uniform, but he was conscious and alert. The second soldier was Corporal Martinez, a veteran with 2 previous deployments who had been caught in the grenade explosion. "Johnson, you're going to be fine," Maria assured the young soldier as she quickly assessed his wound. "The bullet went clean through your shoulder. I'm going to stop the bleeding and give you something for the pain." Her hands worked efficiently, applying pressure dressings and injecting morphine to manage his suffering. Martinez was in much worse condition. The grenade blast had caused severe trauma to his legs and lower torso. Maria realized immediately that he needed surgical intervention beyond what she could provide in the field, but she could stabilize him for evacuation. His breathing was labored, and his pulse was weak but detectable. "Danny, call for immediate medical evacuation," Maria shouted while working on Martinez. "Tell them we need a bird here now for urgent surgical cases. Give them our grid coordinates and current enemy situation." As she worked on Martinez, Maria could hear Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's voice on the radio, calmly directing his various units despite the chaos surrounding the command post. His professional demeanor under fire was exactly what his soldiers needed to maintain their discipline and effectiveness in combat. "Maria's team, this is 6. Mitchell's voice crackled through Danny's radio. "What's your status? We have additional casualties at the command post and need medical support here urgently." Maria looked up from her patient to assess the tactical situation. Martinez was stabilized enough for transport, and Johnson could move with assistance. But the command post was still under heavy fire, and reaching it would be extremely dangerous. She had to make a decision that balanced saving the lives she could reach against the risk to her own team. "Danny, tell 6 we're finishing treatment here and moving to his position in 2 minutes. Tell him to prep casualties for treatment and mark his position with smoke if possible." Hassan had been maintaining steady return fire, but Maria could see that enemy forces were maneuvering to better positions. The initial surprise of their attack was wearing off, and the American soldiers were beginning to organize an effective defense. However, the enemy still held tactical advantages that made the situation extremely dangerous. "Sergeant," Hassan called out, "I count at least 4 enemy positions with clear shots of the command post. We're going to take fire moving across that open ground." Maria finished stabilizing Martinez and helped Johnson to his feet. The young soldier could walk with assistance, though his wounded shoulder limited his mobility. She made the decision to have 2nd Squad evacuate their own casualties while her team moved to assist at the command post where more serious injuries were reported. "2nd Squad leader, can you get these 2 back to the landing zone for medical evacuation?" Maria asked. The squad leader nodded grimly, understanding that Maria's team needed to help other wounded soldiers who couldn't wait for evacuation. The movement toward the command post required crossing approximately 100 meters of open ground while under direct enemy observation. Maria studied the terrain carefully, identifying rocks and depressions that could provide momentary cover during their advance. The enemy positions were well concealed, making it difficult to determine exactly where the fire was coming from. "We're going to move by bounds," Maria told her team. "Hassan, you provide covering fire while Danny and I advance 50 meters. Then, Danny covers while Hassan moves up. We keep leapfrogging until we reach the command post. Everyone understand?" Both soldiers nodded, their faces showing the determined focus that came with combat experience. They had performed similar movements under fire before, though never in a situation quite this intense. Maria checked her medical supplies one final time, ensuring everything was secure for the dangerous movement ahead. "Hassan, start putting rounds on that ridgeline. Danny, stay close to me and keep that radio working. If I get hit, you take over medical duties until we can get proper help. Everyone ready." The covering fire began as Hassan engaged the enemy positions with rapid, accurate shots. Maria and Danny emerged from cover and began their sprint across the open ground. Immediately, enemy fire shifted toward them, bullets striking the ground all around their running figures. Maria felt the familiar sensation of time slowing down that came with extreme danger, her senses heightened to supernatural levels. They reached the halfway point and dug behind a cluster of rocks, just as an intense burst of gunfire swept the area they had just vacated. Danny's radio crackled with communications from various units, painting a picture of a complex battle developing across the entire area. Maria realized this was not a small skirmish, but a coordinated enemy attack on multiple American positions. "Go! Go! Go!" Maria shouted as Hassan began his movement forward. She and Danny provided covering fire, try to suppress the enemy positions long enough for Hassan to reach their location. Enemy fighters were becoming bolder, exposing themselves to get better shots at the moving American soldiers. Hassan slid into their position just as a grenade exploded 20 meters away, showering them with dirt and rock fragments. The enemy was escalating their attacks, probably because they realized the Americans were successfully treating wounded and organizing their defense. Maria knew they needed to reach the command post quickly before the tactical situation deteriorated further. "Next bound takes us to the command post," Maria announced. "Danny, you and Hassan move together this time. I'll follow immediately behind with covering fire." We all arrive together and immediately start treating casualties. The final movement across the open ground was the most dangerous yet. Enemy fire seemed to come from every direction as all three soldiers sprinted toward the command post. Maria could see muzzle flashes from multiple enemy positions, confirming Hassan's earlier assessment that they were heavily outnumbered. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's position was partially protected by rocks and hastily constructed defensive barriers, but Maria could see immediately that several soldiers had been wounded. Mitchell himself was still upright and directing the defense, but blood stained his left arm where shrapnel had torn through his uniform. His command staff was reduced to half strength, with several men lying motionless. "Mitchell!" Maria shouted as she slid into the defensive position. "How bad are you hit?" She was already moving toward the most seriously wounded soldiers while asking about the colonel's condition. Her training had taught her to assess and prioritize multiple casualties simultaneously. "I'm fine, Maria," Mitchell replied, his voice strained but steady. Sergeant Williams took a round in the chest, and Lieutenant Baker was hit by grenade fragments. "They need you more than I do right now." Maria quickly examined both casualties. Sergeant Williams had a sucking chest wound that required immediate intervention to prevent his lung from collapsing. Lieutenant Baker's injuries were serious, but not immediately life-threatening. She began working on Williams first, applying an occlusive dressing to seal the chest wound. "Danny, start in 4 on Lieutenant Baker," Maria commanded while continuing to work on Williams. "Hassan, help me roll Williams to check for exit wounds." "Colonel, how's your ammunition situation?" Mitchell continued directing the defensive fire while responding to Maria's question. "We're starting to run low on rifle ammunition, but we have plenty of grenades left. Enemy forces appear to be massing for another assault. Medical evacuation is going to be difficult under current conditions." As Maria worked on the wounded soldiers, she could hear the battle intensifying around them. Enemy fire was becoming more accurate and sustained, suggesting that additional fighters had joined the attack. The tactical situation was becoming increasingly desperate, and she realized that medical evacuation might not be possible until the enemy attack was repelled. Williams was stabilized enough to survive for several hours if necessary, though he needed surgical intervention as soon as possible. Baker was conscious and could assist with his own care. Maria turned her attention to Mitchell's wounded arm, which was bleeding more heavily than he had admitted. "Colonel, let me look at that arm," Maria insisted. Mitchell reluctantly extended his injured limb, revealing a deep laceration caused by metal fragments. The wound needed stitching, but was not immediately dangerous. Maria applied a pressure dressing and gave Mitchell a shot of painkiller. "Sir, you need to be more careful," Maria said while bandaging Mitchell's arm. "Your soldiers need you alive and functional." Mitchell nodded grimly. "Maria, I need you to know something. Intelligence intercepted enemy communications indicating they're specifically targeting command personnel and medical staff. They know we're here, and they're trying to eliminate our leadership and our ability to treat casualties." This information explained the intensity and coordination of the enemy attack. Maria realized that her position as the primary medical provider made her a specific target. The enemy understood that eliminating medical support would demoralize American forces and increase casualty rates from treatable wounds. Hassan, Danny, Maria called her team members, were being specifically targeted. Stay alert and be ready to move quickly if our position becomes untenable. Keep your medical training in mind. If something happens to me, soldiers' lives depend on your ability to provide emergency care. The sound of helicopter rotors became audible in the distance, suggesting that medical evacuation might be possible despite the enemy fire. However, Maria knew that landing a helicopter in the current tactical situation would be extremely dangerous for the flight crew. They would need to suppress enemy fire long enough to evacuate the most critically wounded. 6. This is Eagle Flight. A pilot's voice came through the radio. We're inbound for medical evacuation, but we're taking ground fire. Can you suppress enemy positions long enough for us to land? Mitchell coordinated with his remaining soldiers to concentrate their fire on known enemy positions. The plan required precise timing. They would need to overwhelm the enemy fighters just long enough for the helicopter to land, load casualties, and take off again. Maria prepared her patients for rapid evacuation while continuing to monitor their conditions. The helicopter appeared through the smoke and dust, flying low and fast to minimize exposure to enemy fire. Maria could see the gunner returning fire at enemy positions while the pilot maneuvered toward their landing zone. The aircraft took several hits, but continued its approach, demonstrating the courage of military aviators under fire. As the helicopter touched down, Maria and her team quickly began loading the most critically wounded soldiers. Williams went first, followed by Baker and the other seriously injured men. The process took less than 3 minutes, but enemy fire intensified as fighters tried to prevent the successful medical evacuation. Just as the helicopter was preparing to lift off, a sustained burst of enemy fire raked across the landing zone. Maria heard the distinctive sound of bullets striking metal and saw sparks flying from the aircraft's engine compartment. The pilot's voice came through the radio with urgent concern about possible mechanical damage. We're hit, but still flyable, the pilot reported. Getting out of here now before we lose power completely. The helicopter lifted off successfully, carrying the wounded soldiers toward medical facilities where they could receive proper surgical care. Maria felt a moment of satisfaction knowing that she had saved lives, but her attention immediately returned to the ongoing battle and the soldiers who still needed her help. With the medical evacuation helicopter safely away, the intensity of enemy fire seemed to double. Maria realized the fighters were frustrated by the successful evacuation and were now concentrating all their efforts on preventing any additional rescues. The tactical situation at the command post remained extremely dangerous, with enemy forces holding multiple advantageous positions around their perimeter. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell continued coordinating the defense despite his wounded arm, his calm voice on a radio providing steady leadership to his scattered units. Maria could see the strain on his face as he balanced multiple tactical challenges while managing his own pain. His dedication to his soldiers was evident in every decision he made under fire. Maria, we have reports of additional casualties from 1st and 3rd squads. Mitchell informed her while scanning the battlefield through binoculars. The enemy is pressing attacks on multiple fronts, trying to overwhelm our positions before reinforcements arrive. Can your team reach those casualties? Maria assessed the tactical situation carefully. The enemy had demonstrated sophisticated planning and coordination, suggesting this was not a random encounter, but a well-planned ambush. Reaching the other wounded soldiers would require movement across open ground under direct enemy observation from elevated positions. Sir, what's our timeline for reinforcements? Maria asked while checking her remaining medical supplies. She had used a significant portion of her equipment treating the casualties they had already evacuated, but still had enough for several more serious injuries. Fast movers are inbound in 15 minutes. Ground reinforcements in 30, Mitchell replied. But we need to hold our positions and keep treating casualties until then. These soldiers can't wait 30 minutes for medical attention. Hassan crouched nearby, his rifle trained on enemy positions while monitoring radio communications. Sergeant, First squad reports 1 urgent surgical and 2 walking wounded. Third squad has 2 urgent and 1 critical who can't be moved without medical support. The mathematics of battlefield triage were stark and unforgiving. Maria had 3 team members, including herself, multiple critically wounded soldiers scattered across a battlefield, and enemy forces actively trying to prevent medical treatment. Her decisions over the next few minutes would determine how many soldiers went home alive. Danny established communication with First Squad and get exact grid coordinates for their casualties, Maria ordered. Hassan, I need you to identify the best route to Third Squad's position. Colonel, can you coordinate covering fire for medical movement? Mitchell nodded grimly. I'll have Second Squad and what's left of Headquarters Element provide covering fire. But Maria, you need to understand the enemy is specifically targeting medical personnel. They know eliminating you will increase our casualties exponentially. This confirmation of the intelligence Mitchell had shared earlier made Maria's mission even more dangerous. Enemy fighters were not just defending positions or conducting random attacks. They were implementing a calculated strategy to maximize American casualties by preventing medical treatment. Every movement she made would draw concentrated fire. The radio crackled with urgent communications from First Squad. Command, this is First Squad leader. We have Private Chun with penetrating abdominal wound, urgent surgical. He's losing blood fast and needs medical attention immediately. Other casualties are stable, but need treatment soon. Maria made her decision. Hassan, you and Danny moved to First Squad position and treat Chun. I'll take the critical casualty with Third Squad, who can't be moved. We were simultaneously and extract back to this position for coordination. Sergeant, that means you'll be working alone with no backup, Hassan protested. If you get hit, there's no one to provide medical coverage while you're down. Maria understood the risk, but the alternative was watching soldiers die from treatable wounds while she maintained personal safety. Her oath as a medic was clear: provide medical care regardless of personal risk. The Army had trained her to accept dangerous missions when soldiers' lives were at stake. Hassan, Chun dies if you don't reach him in 10 minutes, Maria stated firmly. I can handle 1 critical casualty and extract back here before my absence becomes a tactical problem. Mitchell, give us covering fire on my signal. The 2 separate medical missions began simultaneously as Maria moved toward Third Squad, while Hassan and Danny advanced on First Squad's position. Enemy fire immediately intensified as shooters tried to engage both medical teams. Mitchell's soldiers responded with concentrated suppressive fire, forcing enemy fighters to take cover. Maria's movement toward Third Squad required crossing a ravine that provided concealment from direct observation, but channeled her into a predictable route. She knew enemy forces might anticipate this movement and position fighters to intercept her, but the terrain offered no better alternatives. Halfway to Third Squad's position, Maria heard the distinctive crack of a sniper rifle. The bullet struck rocks just inches from her head, showering her with fragments. An enemy marksman had indeed positioned himself to engage medical personnel moving through the ravine. She was now in a deadly game of cat and mouse with a skilled shooter. Third Squad, this is Maria, she whispered into her radio. I'm taking sniper fire in the ravine. Can you identify the shooter's position and provide counter-sniper fire? Maria, we think he's on the ridge line approximately 300 meters northeast of your position, came the reply. We're engaging now with designated marksman fire. The sound of precise rifle shots echoed across the battlefield as Third Squad's marksmen engaged the enemy sniper. Maria used this covering fire to advance the final distance to their position, knowing that every second counted for the critical casualty waiting for her medical expertise. Third Squad's defensive position was a natural depression surrounded by rocks, providing excellent protection from most enemy fire, but leaving the soldiers vulnerable to grenades and mortars. Maria could immediately see why they couldn't move their critical casualty. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had suffered severe leg trauma from an improvised explosive device and was in shock from blood loss. "Rodriguez, I'm here," Maria announced as she began her medical assessment. "You're going to be fine, but I need to work on these legs immediately." Her hands moved efficiently, checking pulse points and assessing the extent of the damage while Rodriguez drifted in and out of consciousness. The IED explosion had caused massive trauma to both of Rodriguez's legs, with multiple fractures and severe bleeding from several arteries. Maria realized immediately that moving him without proper stabilization would likely cause fatal blood loss. She would need to perform complex field surgery under fire to save his life. "Squad leader, I need 15 minutes of uninterrupted time to stabilize Rodriguez," Maria announced while beginning emergency surgery. "He has arterial bleeding that requires immediate repair. Can you maintain your defensive perimeter and keep enemy fire off my position?" "Roger, we'll hold them off," the squad leader replied. "But, Maria, we're running low on ammunition and enemy forces are massing for another assault. Work as fast as you can." Maria began the delicate process of locating and clamping damaged arteries in Rodriguez's legs. This type of surgery normally required a sterile operating room and multiple assistants, but battlefield conditions demanded improvisation with limited resources. Her medical training had prepared her for exactly these situations where standard procedures were impossible. Enemy fire continued around their position while Maria worked, but 3rd Squad maintained effective defensive fire that kept shooters from getting clear shots at her location. The soldiers understood that their squad mate's life depended on their ability to protect their medic while she performed life-saving surgery. Rodriguez regained consciousness during the procedure, his eyes focusing on Maria's face as she worked on his injuries. "Doc, am I going to lose my legs?" he asked weakly, the pain evident in his voice despite the morphine she had administered. "Rodriguez, you're going to walk out of here," Maria assured him while continuing her emergency surgery. "These injuries look worse than they are. I'm stopping the bleeding now, and you'll be dancing at your daughter's wedding next year, just like you planned." Her confidence was somewhat optimistic, but Maria knew that maintaining patient morale was crucial for survival. Rodriguez needed to believe he would recover fully in order to maintain the will to fight through the trauma and blood loss. Medical psychology was as important as surgical technique in battlefield conditions. The arterial bleeding was finally controlled after 12 minutes of intense surgical work under fire. Rodriguez's vital signs had stabilized, and Maria was confident he could survive evacuation to a proper medical facility. However, moving him would still require extreme care to prevent reopening the repaired blood vessels. "Squad leader, Rodriguez is stabilized for movement," Maria announced. "But we need to carry him on a litter and move very carefully. Any rough handling could restart the bleeding and kill him within minutes." The tactical situation around 3rd Squad's position had deteriorated during Maria's surgical work. Enemy forces had maneuvered closer and were preparing for a final assault on the American positions. The squad leader estimated they had perhaps 5 minutes before being overrun by superior numbers. "Maria, we need to move now," the squad leader urged. "Enemy forces are massing in the rocks about 200 meters from here. If we don't extract immediately, we'll all be trapped." Maria made rapid preparations for moving Rodriguez while maintaining the medical interventions that were keeping him alive. She rigged a makeshift litter from equipment and positioned his legs to minimize stress on the repaired arteries. The movement back to the command post would be extremely dangerous for everyone involved. Just as they prepared to move, explosions erupted around their position. Enemy fighters were attacking with grenades and rocket-propelled grenades, try to eliminate the American position before reinforcements arrived. The sound of incoming mortars added another layer of danger to their desperate situation. "Contact front," one of the squad members shouted as enemy fighters emerged from concealment less than 100 meters away. A fierce firefight erupted as both sides engaged at close range. Maria found herself treating a patient while bullets flew over her head, and explosions shook the ground beneath her feet. The squad's defensive fire was accurate and disciplined, but Maria could see they were being overwhelmed by superior numbers. Enemy fighters were advancing from multiple directions, and the American soldiers were running dangerously low on ammunition. Without immediate support, their position would be overrun within minutes. All stations, this is fast mover flight. A pilot's voice crackled through the radio. We have eyes on enemy positions and are cleared hot for close air support. Mark your positions and take cover immediately. Third squad members threw colored smoke grenades to mark their location while taking the best cover available. Maria positioned herself over Rodriguez to shield him from the incoming airstrike while continuing to monitor his medical condition. The sound of approaching jet aircraft grew louder as the pilots lined up their attack runs. The close air support arrived with devastating precision. High explosive rounds and cannon fire tore through enemy positions, eliminating multiple fighting positions and scattering the attacking forces. The immediate threat to Third Squad was neutralized, but Maria knew enemy fighters would regroup and resume their attacks once the aircraft departed. Third Squad, this is command. Mitchell's voice came through the radio. Air support has cleared your immediate area. Move to evacuation point Alpha with your casualties. Ground reinforcements are 5 minutes out. The movement toward evacuation point Alpha required carrying Rodriguez across difficult terrain while maintaining security against remaining enemy forces. Maria coordinated the litter movement while continuing to monitor his vital signs and adjust medical interventions as needed. Every step risked reopening his arterial repairs. Hassan's voice came through the radio with an update from First Squad's position. Maria, Chun is stabilized and ready for evacuation. We're moving to link up with you at evacuation point Alpha. Danny took minor shrapnel wounds, but is still functional. The convergence of multiple elements at the evacuation point created both opportunities and risks. Having all the casualties in one location would simplify medical evacuation procedures, but it also created a lucrative target for any remaining enemy forces. Maria knew they would need to maintain security while preparing patients for helicopter evacuation. As they reached the evacuation point, Maria could see the approaching dust clouds that indicated ground reinforcements were almost at their location. The sound of helicopter rotors was also audible in the distance, suggesting that medical evacuation was imminent. The tactical situation was finally stabilizing in their favor. However, Maria's most dangerous moment was still ahead. Intelligence reports indicated that Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell had been specifically targeted by enemy forces, and his continued survival was crucial for the overall success of the mission. The next phase of the operation would test every aspect of her medical training and combat experience. The radio crackled with an urgent transmission. All stations, this is Overwatch. Large enemy force massing to the north for final assault on command post. Estimate company-sized element with heavy weapons. All available units converge on command post immediately. Maria realized that while she had been treating casualties at scattered positions, enemy forces had been preparing a massive assault on Mitchell's command post. The successful evacuation of wounded soldiers had been only the first phase of a much larger battle, and the most dangerous fighting was yet to come. The evacuation helicopter landed in a whirlwind of dust and rotor wash, its crew working with practiced efficiency to load the wounded soldiers Maria had treated and stabilized. Rodriguez was carefully transferred to the aircraft's medical bay while maintaining the delicate positioning that protected his arterial repairs. Maria provided rapid medical briefings to the flight medic about each patient's condition and treatment requirements. Rodriguez has bilateral arterial repairs in both legs, Maria shouted over the helicopter noise. Any rough movement could restart bleeding. Chun has stabilized abdominal wound, but needs immediate surgical intervention. Priority surgical cases for both patients. The flight medic nodded, understanding, while securing the patients for transport. These were experienced medical professionals who understood battlefield trauma and would ensure the wounded soldiers received proper care at the forward surgical hospital. Maria felt the satisfaction of successful patient outcomes despite the dangerous circumstances. As the helicopter lifted off with the casualties, Maria's radio crackled with increasingly urgent communications from Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's command post. The intelligence reports about a company-sized enemy assault were proving accurate, and the tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. Mitchell's voice remained calm, but carried new tension that indicated extreme danger. "All units converge on command post immediately," Mitchell transmitted. "We have confirmed enemy company approaching from the north with heavy weapons and mortars. Current strength at command post is 12 effectives. We need every available soldier for defensive action." Maria gathered Hassan and Danny, quickly checking their ammunition and medical supplies. The ground reinforcements that had arrived were immediately redirected to support Mitchell's desperate defensive situation. Every American soldier in the area was needed to prevent the command post from being overrun by superior enemy forces. Hassan, Danny, were moving back to support the command post, Maria announced while checking her remaining medical supplies. "This is going to be the main event. Make sure you have full magazines and all your medical gear ready. We're probably going to need everything we have." The movement back toward Mitchell's position revealed the true scope of the enemy assault. Through binoculars, Maria could see large numbers of enemy fighters moving through the rocky terrain to the north. Their movement was disciplined and coordinated, suggesting these were experienced fighters rather than local militia. The enemy had committed significant resources to this attack. "Contact north." The radio exploded with urgent transmissions as the enemy assault began. Heavy machine gun fire raked across the command post, forcing Mitchell's soldiers to take cover behind their hastily improved defensive positions. The enemy had brought crew-served weapons that outranged anything the Americans possessed. Maria's team arrived at the command post just as the first enemy mortar rounds began falling. The explosions were close enough to shower them with dirt and rock fragments, and Maria realized the enemy had precise coordinates for Mitchell's position. This level of accuracy suggested either direct observation or detailed intelligence about American positions. "Mitchell, where do you need us?" Maria shouted while diving into the defensive perimeter. She could see immediately that several soldiers had been wounded by the initial mortar barrage. Mitchell himself had blood running down his face from a head wound, though he remained upright and continued directing the defense. "Maria, we have 3 wounded from that mortar attack," Mitchell replied while pointing toward soldiers lying near the northern defensive line. "But the main assault is just beginning. They're going to try to overrun us with direct assault after the mortars soften us up." The tactical situation was unlike anything Maria had experienced in her previous deployments. The enemy force was large enough and well-equipped enough to pose a serious threat to American positions, even with air support and reinforcements. This was conventional warfare rather than the guerrilla tactics more common in Afghanistan. Hassan immediately moved to assist the wounded soldiers, while Danny established communication with the incoming reinforcements. Maria began treating Mitchell's head wound, which was bleeding heavily but not immediately life-threatening. The colonel's continued leadership was crucial for coordinating the defensive effort. "Sir, you have a concussion from that mortar blast," Maria diagnosed while applying a pressure dressing to Mitchell's head wound. "You need to be careful about your decision-making ability and watch for symptoms of severe brain injury." Mitchell nodded grimly while continuing to coordinate defensive fires through his radio. "Maria, I need you to understand something. Intelligence indicates this enemy force has orders to capture or eliminate command personnel. They specifically want me alive or dead, and they know you're the primary medical officer." This information explained the intensity and coordination of the enemy assault. Mitchell was not just any field commander. His intelligence value or symbolic importance made him a high-priority target. The enemy was willing to commit significant resources and accept heavy casualties to accomplish their objective. The mortar barrage intensified as enemy forces prepared for their ground assault. Maria could hear the distinctive sound of incoming rounds and instinctively pressed herself against the rocky ground. Each explosion seemed closer than the last, suggesting the enemy was adjusting their fire based on observed impacts. "Incoming!" someone shouted as a mortar round landed directly in the defensive perimeter. The explosion was deafening, and Maria felt the shock wave pass through her body. When the smoke cleared, she could see additional casualties among Mitchell's defenders. The enemy bombardment was achieving its intended effect of reducing American fighting strength. Corporal Williams, a machine gunner who had been providing crucial defensive fire, was now lying motionless with severe wounds from the mortar blast. His weapon was undamaged, but unmanned, creating a dangerous gap in the defensive line. Maria realized she would need to treat Williams while also helping to maintain defensive fires. "Hassan, take over Williams' machine gun position," Maria commanded while moving toward the wounded soldier. "Danny, help me with this casualty, and then get on that radio to coordinate with reinforcements. We need support here immediately." Williams had multiple fragment wounds and was unconscious from blast concussion. Maria began emergency treatment while enemy small arms fire intensified around their position. She could hear the distinctive crack of bullets passing close overhead as enemy marksmen tried to prevent medical treatment of American casualties. The ground assault began with a coordinated rush by approximately 40 enemy fighters advancing from multiple directions. Mitchell's reduced force was heavily outnumbered, but their defensive positions provided some advantage against the attacking force. The American soldiers' superior training and equipment quality would be tested against overwhelming numerical superiority. "Contact all around." Multiple voices filled the radio frequency as enemy fighters engaged American positions from north, east, and west. The southern approach was blocked by steep terrain, but the enemy had effectively surrounded the command post on three sides. Mitchell's soldiers were fighting for their lives against professional enemy forces. Maria continued treating Williams while bullets snapped through the air around her position. Her medical training had taught her to compartmentalize fear and focus on saving lives, but the intensity of enemy fire was greater than anything she had previously experienced. Every second spent treating casualties increased her exposure to enemy fire. Hassan's machine gun fire was accurate and disciplined, forcing enemy fighters to take cover and slowing their advance. However, Maria could see that the attacking force was too large to be stopped by their current defensive fires. Without immediate reinforcement or air support, the command post would be overrun within minutes. "Fast movers, this is ground control." Mitchell's voice was strained but professional as he called for close air support. "We have troops in contact. Danger close situation. Enemy forces are within 50 meters of friendly positions. Need immediate air support or we will be overrun." The pilots responded immediately, but Maria knew that close air support in such proximity to friendly forces was extremely dangerous. The margin for error was minimal, and any mistake could result in American casualties from friendly fire. However, without air support, they would certainly be overrun by enemy forces. Williams regained consciousness just as enemy fighters reached the outer edge of the defensive perimeter. "Doc, am I going to make it?" he asked weakly, his voice barely audible over the sound of gunfire. Maria could see the fear in his eyes as he realized how close enemy forces had advanced. "Williams, you're going to be fine," Maria assured him while applying additional bandages to his wounds. "These injuries look bad, but they're all treatable. Just stay down and let us handle the fighting." Her confidence was genuine. Williams would survive if they could hold off the enemy assault long enough for evacuation. The sound of approaching aircraft provided momentary hope, but Maria realized the jets would need several minutes to coordinate their attack run safely. During those minutes, enemy forces would continue their advance and might succeed in overrunning the American positions. The timing would be critical for survival. Enemy fighters had advanced within 30 meters of Mitchell's position when the colonel made a decision that would change everything. Rather than remaining in his relatively protected command location, Mitchell grabbed his rifle and moved to the most exposed position on the defensive line where enemy pressure was greatest. All stations, this is 6. Mitchell transmitted while moving forward. I'm reinforcing the northern line. Continue defensive fires and prepare for close air support. Do not let them break through the perimeter. Maria watched in amazement as Mitchell, despite his head wound and injured arm, positioned himself where the fighting was most intense. His personal example inspired his soldiers to maintain their defensive fires even though they were heavily outnumbered. Leadership under fire was making the difference between success and failure. The enemy assault reached its climax just as the first air support arrived. Enemy fighters were advancing in small groups, using covering fire and tactical movement to close with American positions. Maria could see individual enemy faces as they maneuvered through the rocks, their determination evident in their aggressive advancement. Danger close! Danger close! Mitchell shouted into his radio as he marked enemy positions with colored smoke. The air support pilots would need to deliver ordnance within meters of American soldiers to be effective. This required exceptional skill and courage from both ground forces and air crews. The close air support struck with devastating accuracy, eliminating multiple enemy fighting positions and breaking up the coordinated assault. However, Maria could see that significant numbers of enemy fighters had survived and were regrouping for another attack. The battle was far from over, and Mitchell's position remained extremely dangerous. During the brief lull after the airstrike, Maria heard the sound that would haunt her nightmares for years to come. A single enemy sniper, hidden in elevated rocks, fired one carefully aimed shot. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell, who had been coordinating with air support while exposed at the northern defensive line, suddenly dropped to the ground. Mitchell's hit, Maria screamed, immediately moving toward his position despite the continued enemy fire. She could see blood spreading beneath the colonel's motionless form and realized that the enemy had achieved their primary objective. The man whose leadership was holding the defense together had been critically wounded. "Hassan, Danny, cover my movement!" Maria shouted while sprinting toward Mitchell's position. Enemy fire immediately concentrated on her as she crossed the open ground between defensive positions. Bullets struck rocks all around her, but her determination to reach the wounded colonel drove her forward despite the incredible danger. She reached Mitchell's position and immediately began medical assessment. The sniper's bullet had struck him in the upper chest, creating a serious wound that was bleeding heavily. Mitchell was conscious but in severe pain. His breathing labored from possible lung damage. This was exactly the type of injury that could kill quickly without immediate treatment. "Mitchell, stay with me," Maria commanded while beginning emergency treatment. "You're hit bad, but I can fix this. Just keep breathing and stay conscious." Her hands worked frantically to control bleeding and stabilize his breathing while enemy fire continued around their exposed position. The wounded colonel's eyes focused on Maria's face as she worked on his injuries. "Maria," he whispered weakly, "don't let them break through. These soldiers need leadership. If I don't make it, you have to keep them together." Maria realized that Mitchell's survival was not just medically important. It was tactically crucial for the success of the entire defensive operation. The soldiers were fighting harder because their commander was fighting alongside them. If Mitchell died, the defense might collapse even if she could treat his wounds. Maria worked frantically on Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's chest wound while enemy fire intensified around their exposed position. The sniper's bullet had punctured his lung and created massive internal bleeding that required immediate surgical intervention. Her field medical training was being tested to its absolute limits as she performed life-saving procedures under direct enemy fire. "Mitchell, I need you to stay awake and keep talking," Maria commanded while inserting a chest tube to reinflate his collapsed lung. Tell me about your family. Tell me about anything, but don't you dare pass out on me. She knew that keeping patients conscious and engaged often meant the difference between life and death in trauma situations. The colonel's voice was weak, but determined as he responded. My daughter Sarah is getting married next month. I promised to walk her down the aisle. Maria, you have to make sure I keep that promise. His words provided the motivation Maria needed to perform procedures she had only practiced in medical training scenarios. Enemy forces were regrouping for another assault while Maria stabilized Mitchell's breathing and controlled his bleeding. She could hear Hassan and Danny maintaining defensive fires, but knew they were critically outnumbered without Mitchell's leadership coordinating the overall defense. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly despite her successful medical interventions. Hassan, Danny, how much ammunition do we have left? Maria shouted while continuing to work on Mitchell's injuries. She needed to know if they could sustain defensive fires long enough for reinforcements to arrive. The mathematics of combat were simple and brutal. They would either receive help soon or be overrun by superior enemy forces. Running low on rifle ammunition, Hassan replied while engaging enemy targets. Maybe 10 minutes of sustained fire before we're down to pistols and grenades. Danny's radio took shrapnel damage, but he's still getting intermittent communication with reinforcements. Maria made rapid calculations about Mitchell's medical condition and their tactical situation. The colonel was stabilized enough to survive several hours if protected from further injury, but moving him would be extremely dangerous. However, staying in their current position meant certain death when they ran out of ammunition. Danny, get on that radio and tell reinforcements we need immediate support, Maria commanded while applying additional pressure dressings to Mitchell's wounds. Tell them we have critical casualty requiring urgent evacuation and are about to be overrun. Give them our exact coordinates and current enemy strength. The radio crackled with static and intermittent communications as Danny struggled with damaged equipment. Maria, I'm getting broken transmissions from ground reinforcements. Sounds like they're engaged with enemy forces about 2 kilometers south of our position. They're fighting their way toward us, but taking heavy casualties. This information meant that help was coming, but might not arrive in time. Maria realized she would need to make decisions about Mitchell's medical care based on worst-case tactical scenarios. If they were overrun, her priority would shift to keeping the colonel alive until the position could be retaken. Enemy mortar fire resumed with renewed intensity as fighters prepared for their final assault. The explosions were walking closer to Maria's position, and she could feel the ground shaking with each impact. She instinctively covered Mitchell's body with her own to protect him from flying fragments while continuing to monitor his vital signs. Incoming mortars! Hassan shouted as he pressed himself against the rocky ground. A massive explosion erupted just 20 meters from their position, showering everyone with dirt and stone fragments. Maria felt something strike her left shoulder, but ignored the pain while maintaining pressure on Mitchell's chest wound. When the smoke cleared from the mortar barrage, Maria realized that Hassan had been wounded by fragments. Blood was flowing down his right arm, and he was having difficulty operating his machine gun with one functional hand. Their defensive capabilities were degrading rapidly as casualties mounted among the small defending force. Hassan, let me look at that arm, Maria called out while still treating Mitchell. She was now dealing with multiple casualties while enemy forces prepared for another ground assault. Her medical training had taught her to prioritize patients, but the tactical situation meant everyone's survival depended on maintaining defensive fires. Negative, Doc, Hassan replied grimly. I can still fight with this arm. Mitchell needs you more than I do right now. Just tell me how to bandage this so I can keep shooting. His determination to continue fighting despite his wounds exemplified the spirit that made American soldiers formidable in combat. Maria quickly instructed Hassan on self-aid while continuing to monitor Mitchell's breathing and circulation. The colonel's vital signs were stable but weak indicating that he was surviving on the edge of medical crisis. Any additional stress or blood loss could prove fatal within minutes. The sound of approaching helicopters provided momentary hope, but Maria could see that the aircraft were taking heavy enemy fire as they attempted to reach the landing zone. Tracer rounds streaked through the air toward the helicopters, and she watched in horror as one aircraft was struck and began smoking badly. Eagle Flight, this is ground control, came an urgent radio transmission. Landing zone is too hot for safe approach. We're taking heavy fire from multiple positions. Can you suppress enemy anti-aircraft fires? Maria realized that helicopter evacuation was impossible under current conditions. Mitchell would need to survive whatever happened next without immediate access to surgical facilities. Her field medical treatment would have to sustain him through the remainder of the battle, regardless of how long it lasted. Enemy fighters emerged from concealment for what appeared to be their final assault. Maria could count at least 30 individuals advancing from a north and east, moving with tactical discipline that indicated professional military training. The American defenders were outnumbered more than 3-1, with limited ammunition and multiple wounded personnel. "This is it," Danny announced while checking his rifle's ammunition. "They're coming straight at us this time. No more probing attacks or artillery preparation. They want to finish this quickly before our reinforcements arrive." Maria made a decision that would define the rest of her military career. Rather than remaining focused solely on treating Mitchell's wounds, she grabbed her rifle and positioned herself to defend his location. The colonel's survival depended not just on medical care, but on preventing enemy forces from reaching his position. "Hassan, Danny, we hold this position no matter what," Maria declared while taking aim at advancing enemy fighters. "Mitchell's life depends on us, and these soldiers need their commander. We don't give ground, and we don't stop fighting until help arrives." The final enemy assault began with concentrated small arms fire from multiple directions. Maria found herself alternating between treating Mitchell's wounds and returning fire at advancing enemy fighters. Her medical bag lay open beside the colonel's position, allowing her to monitor his condition while engaging enemy targets. Enemy fighters advanced to within 20 meters before American defensive fire began taking effect. Maria's marksmanship training proved effective as she engaged targets while maintaining pressure on Mitchell's chest wound with one hand. The awkward position made accurate shooting difficult, but her determination was absolute. "Got one," Hassan shouted as his machine gun fire dropped an enemy fighter who had been advancing on their left flank. Despite his wounded arm, he was maintaining effective fire that forced other attackers to take cover. Danny was also engaging multiple targets with careful, aimed shots that conserved their limited ammunition. The battle reached its climax when an enemy fighter broke through their defensive line and advanced directly toward Mitchell's position. Maria saw him approaching and realized he was specifically targeting the wounded American commander. She dropped her rifle and grabbed her pistol while positioning herself between the enemy fighter and the helpless colonel. The enemy fighter was less than 10 meters away when Maria engaged him with her sidearm. Her pistol training saved both their lives as she fired multiple rounds center mass, dropping the attacker just meters from Mitchell's location. The colonel was too weak to defend himself, making Maria's intervention absolutely crucial for his survival. "Behind you," Danny shouted as another enemy fighter approached from Maria's blind side. She spun around and saw an armed man raising his weapon toward her position. Time seemed to slow down as Maria realized she might not be able to react quickly enough to prevent him from shooting both her and Mitchell. Hassan's machine gun fire cut down the second attacker just as he was taking aim. The wounded soldier had ignored his own injuries to protect his team members and their patient. His accurate fire eliminated the immediate threat, but Maria could see more enemy fighters maneuvering for better positions. The intensity of combat around Mitchell's position attracted enemy attention away from other defensive positions. Maria realized that by defending the colonel's location so aggressively, she had drawn enemy forces into close-range combat, where American marksmanship training provided maximum advantage over numerical superiority. All enemy fighters down in the northern sector, Hassan reported while scanning for additional threats. I count 8 confirmed kills in our immediate area. Looks like the main assault is broken for now. Maria quickly checked Mitchell's condition while maintaining security around their position. The colonel was still breathing regularly, and his vital signs remained stable despite the stress of combat happening directly over his wounded body. Her medical interventions were keeping him alive through circumstances that would have killed most trauma patients. The sound of approaching ground vehicles indicated that American reinforcements had finally broken through enemy positions and were reaching the command post. Maria could see dust clouds in the distance that suggested multiple vehicles carrying fresh troops and heavy weapons. Help was finally arriving after what seemed like hours of desperate fighting. Friendly forces approaching from the south, Danny announced while monitoring radio communications. Reinforcement company with armor vehicles and additional medical support. Estimated arrival in 5 minutes. The relief in his voice was evident after the prolonged fight against superior enemy numbers. As reinforcements arrived and secured the battlefield, Maria continued treating Mitchell while coordinating with the medical personnel who accompanied the relief force. The colonel required immediate surgical intervention that could only be provided at a fully equipped medical facility, but he had survived the critical first hour through Maria's field treatment. Maria, Mitchell whispered as medics prepared him for helicopter evacuation. You saved my life out there. More than that, you held this position together when everything was falling apart. These soldiers fought harder because they saw you fighting for me. The helicopter evacuation proceeded smoothly once enemy forces had been eliminated or dispersed. Maria accompanied Mitchell during the flight to ensure his medical condition remained stable during transport. Her expert care had kept him alive through the most dangerous phase of his injuries, giving surgeons the opportunity to complete his treatment. 3 weeks later, Maria received orders to report to the Pentagon for a special ceremony. She had no idea that her actions during the battle had been documented through radio communications and eyewitness statements from surviving soldiers. The recommendation for the Medal of Honor had been submitted by Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell himself from his hospital bed. The ceremony took place in the East Room of the White House, with President Obama presenting the nation's highest military honor to Sergeant Maria Santos for conspicuous gallantry and intrepid risk of life above and beyond the call of duty. Her rescue of Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell and defense of the command post had exemplified the finest traditions of military service. Sergeant Santos, the president said while placing the Medal of Honor around her neck, your actions on that battlefield saved not just one life, but potentially dozens of lives. By keeping your commanding officer alive and maintaining the defensive position, you enabled the successful defense of American forces against overwhelming odds. Maria stood at attention while the president spoke, but her thoughts were focused on Hassan, Danny, and all the other soldiers who had fought alongside her that day. The medal was an honor, but the true reward was knowing that Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell had indeed walked his daughter down the aisle at her wedding, just as he had promised during those desperate moments under fire. The citation accompanying the Medal of Honor detailed Maria's actions for conspicuous gallantry and intrepid risk of life above and beyond the call of duty while serving as a combat medic during enemy action in Afghanistan. Sergeant Santos repeatedly exposed herself to intense enemy fire to treat wounded soldiers, performed life-saving surgery under direct enemy observation, and personally defended wounded personnel against enemy assault. Her extraordinary heroism and selfless devotion to duty reflect the finest traditions of military service and bring great credit upon herself, her unit, and the United States Army. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell, who had recovered sufficiently to attend the ceremony, stood proudly as Maria received her medal. His survival and continued military service were testament to the effectiveness of her medical treatment under the most challenging circumstances imaginable. The bond forged in combat would connect them for the rest of their lives, a reminder of the day when medical skill and military courage combined to achieve the impossible.